Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's Good Omens is a well-crafted and hilarious delve into biblical fiction. As a general synopsis, the book is about 500 pages of an angel and a demon, the flaming sword and serpent of Eden respectively, trying their best to stop Armageddon, with the abstract help of witchfinders, witches, and the Antichrist and his friends. The social commentary on relationships, authority, and human nature provided by this book made it a cult classic, and even earned it a TV show, which varies only slightly from the book while still being incredible and recently got a second season expanding on the plot. The whole message of the book revolves around the idea that people should be allowed to do what makes them happy and not be forced to endure things that they don't support. It reflects on learning how to be yourself outside of nature and obligations. The relationships characters have with themselves, each other, and authority make interesting points on human nature in general. So let's dive into it. There's a saying in writing that goes something along the lines of, good characters can carry a bad plot, but the best plot can't carry bad characters. I'm a firm believer of this phrase because if a reader can't relate, support, or understand a character's motivations, the plot loses all of its drive. There's no fun in entering a world where the protagonist is boring and hard to empathize with. The plot itself of Good Omens is intriguing and fun, but if the characters had been miserable, I never would have finished the book. Luckily, however, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman absolutely nailed all of the aspects of each character. Every single person we get introduced to within this story, no matter how important or how inconsequential, is given real personality that makes the story feel entirely well-rounded and believable, even despite all of the magical and miraculous details included. They even help carry a lot of the humor throughout. With an omniscient narrator, we get to see the inside of the minds of the characters, both main and secondary. Having shifting points of view is a very difficult thing to get correct, at least to meet my POV snob standards. But the transitions are seamless, and even characters as small as Skuz the Biker have blatant motivations that make them fun to explore. Even in characters who have no speaking lines, there is a great deal of identity and character growth. We only see through Dog the Hellhound's perspective a handful of times, and even still we get to watch as he falls in love with Earth and having Adam as a master. He explicitly begins under the expectation that he will be helping the Antichrist end the world, and we can see how that idea shifts throughout the story. This wasn't, insofar as the Hellhound had any expectations, what he had imagined life would be like in the last days before Armageddon, but despite himself, he was beginning to enjoy it. The Hellhound was beginning to find happiness in a domestic life, an interesting and quick-laid parallel to Aziraphale and Crowley going native on Earth. Continuing over 100 pages later, this wasn't right, Dog was thinking. Just when I was getting the hang of rats, just when I'd nearly sorted out that bloody German shepherd across the road, now he's going to end it all, and I'll be back with the old glowing eyes and chasing lost souls. What's the sense in that? They don't fight back, and there's no taste to 'em. Dog discovers, in interacting with a being who truly loves him and who he truly makes happy, that life on Earth can be good and fun. He doesn't have to kill more than the rats he hunts. He can receive free affection and play. It's sweet that even animals get to grow and have happy endings in this story. In another minor character, we get to meet Sister Mary Loquacious, satanic nun of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl. It's explicitly stated that she could be incredibly intelligent if she let herself be. She would be quite bright if she was ever put into a position to find out, but long ago found that being a scatterbrain, as she'd put it, gave you an easier journey through life. However, an easier journey doesn't necessarily equate to a fulfilling one, and once she loses the Chattering Order, she finally begins exploring her potential, and she discovered, under layers of silliness and eagerness to please, Mary Hodges. She becomes a successful and brilliant businesswoman entirely on her own and despite the sexism she faces from others, and grows into her own skin quite skillfully. Mary goes from a loose-minded woman who loses the Antichrist to a woman that learns and absorbs, and carries intelligence to the point of calling finances uncomplicated. Outside of interesting character plots, Mary's transition into management training gives us one of the funniest scenes in the book, in which Crowley and Aziraphale get shot with paintballs and genuinely think that they're dying for a few pages. Sergeant Shadwell is a fun character, used much as comic relief while still having a rich backstory. Sergeant and sole remaining member of the Witchfinder Army, he is motivated by a life-altering interaction with a previous WA soldier he met in prison. Since that moment, he dedicated his life to preserving purity using the WA. The characters around him view him as a crazy or antagonistic old man, but he still carries a lot of merit to his character. After interacting with him long enough, Newt and Madame Tracy grow to be fond of Shadwell's quirks and enthusiasm. His character provides an example of a person motivated by a desire to protect, or be the strong one. Shadwell pulled himself together. Even now, young Newt might be suffering unimaginable torture at the hands of the Daughters of Night, and he, Shadwell, had sent him. "We cannot leave our people in there," he said. His development comes from learning which fights are the ones worth fighting and when to allow himself to be cared for, eventually letting himself realize with dawning horror that he was comfortable, horribly, terrifyingly comfortable, when Madame Tracy dotes on him. This is a man who has spent his entire life fighting and is ready to live out the rest of it in peace with people who he cares for and that care for him in equal measure. Newton Pulsifer is a genius character to include in the narrative, and not just because of his eventual significance in conflict resolution. Much like Adam and his friends, Newt's role as a character is to provide a contrast of knowledge. The only difference is that the kids are kids and therefore adaptable to new information, whereas Newt is an adult who already has a solid perspective on the world. Newt is just some normal guy struggling with normal human ideas, like his future and beliefs and self-confidence. He's not supernatural or related to the extraordinary points of the story in any way beyond his ineptitude with computers, which, in his own head, he attributes to extreme misfortune. He checks out the Witchfinder army because he wants to get out of the house and stays because he begins to care about Shadwell, not because he actually thinks witches exist and need to be hunted. In his own perspective, Newton Pulsifer had never had a cause in his life, nor had he, as far as he knew, ever believed in anything. It had been embarrassing because he quite wanted to believe in something, since he recognized that belief was the lifebelt that got most people through the choppy waters of life. He wants to fit in, just like anybody else on Earth. It's something he notably struggles with, which is likely why he takes to working with Shadwell so well. Shadwell gives him a reason to do something productive that he, while not fully believing in it, could get something out of. His fears and humor come together to show how okay it is to just be a person. Your worth doesn't have to be attached to your passion or work. He desperately wants to be a computer engineer, yet blows up any electronic he touches to the point where trying to intentionally break technology makes it work instead. He even lies about this to Anathema when he first meets her, because he doesn't want to seem lame to her. The growth of Newt's character relies on his eventual understanding that being known doesn't have to be a bad thing. The instant Anathema learns the truth, she's supportive of him. The quirk that he was embarrassed by ended up being the key factor in stopping worldwide nuclear war. Quite honestly, I can't emphasize enough how much I love Newt. He's nice and just goes with the flow, and I appreciate his very appropriate reactions to everything happening around him. He's partially losing his mind as the apocalypse goes down, and that's very believable because it is exactly how an average person would react to the world flipping on its head. As for comedy, I love how his humor contains stupid jokes. Newt's car was a wasabi. He called it Dick Turpin, in the hope that one day someone would ask him why. "Why have you got Dick Turpin painted on the door of your car?" "It's a joke, really," said Newt. "Because everywhere I go, I hold up traffic," he mumbled wretchedly. Setting up a dumb joke as a conversation starter is incredible, and the logic behind the joke tickles my funny bone. Dick Turpin was a famous English highwayman. In conclusion, the story greatly benefits from a character who's just a guy, simply a dude who is suffering through these events despite being a tragically average human being. Anathema Device's view on herself is hinged on the expectations of her family. Since the death of Agnes Nutter, the witch's descendants have been memorizing and deciphering the book of prophecies she left behind. The nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, which details over 4,000 important events in the future, up until the end of the world. Anathema is predicted to be the device that fights Armageddon, and has based her entire life around this goal. And, while she does indeed help in stopping Armageddon, she doesn't know what to do with herself afterwards. When she receives the further knife and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter the day after the subverted apocalypse, she is fully prepared to dive back into a life of preparation for the inevitable. Anathema's character, at its narrative core, shows the reader that it's important to live in the moment. The future will come, she needs to learn how to put her worth outside of expectations. Newt explains it quite well when he stops her. "Think of it like this," he said quietly. "Do you want to be a descendant for the rest of your life?" Newt wants to help Anathema live a, while maybe not normal, more contented life. They care about each other. He's saying, you deserve to slow down and enjoy the present, and we can indulge in what we have found with each other. Luckily, even though it's not said explicitly, our authors imply that she chooses to smell the roses. As the Antichrist and therefore extremely significant character in the story, Adam's character arc ranks among my personal favorites. He's just a kid, and yet he's forced to navigate being arguably the most powerful being in the world. Crowley says a few times, when he and Aziraphale first start looking for Adam when they realize that Warlock is not the right kid, that Adam's powers are in stealth mode, so to speak. His powers are active, and actively covering themselves from detection. Adam, without having to think about it or try, changes the weather to be consistently perfect and stops the town where he lives from being taken over by a large highway. These are no small feats. His friends even instinctively know that what Adam says is important when they talk about anything. The merging of his powers with the person he has grown up to be causes great dissonance in his motivations and subsequent actions. He's a kid who is learning his place in the world and making mischief with his friends. This is a human boy that is also somehow meant to spark the celestial war. Adam's arc revolves around how his human desire to have a happy, perfect little world conflicts with the occult ethereal desire for dismantling and rebirth. When the voices of his Antichrist side start kicking in, the idea of fixing everything seems like a grand idea. Something was happening inside his head. It was aching. Thoughts were arriving there without him having to think them. Something was saying, "You can do something, Adam Young. You can make it all better. You can do anything you want." We should start again. Just save the ones we want and start again. That's the best way. It'd be doing the Earth a favor when you come to think about it. It makes me angry, seeing the way those old loonies are messing it up. Adam has come to the realization, as many children in the process of maturing do, that the world is irreparable. Forests are getting chopped down, the ozone layer is shrinking, ice caps are melting, and the worst part is that you can't do anything about it. Except Adam can do something about it. Tearing the Earth apart completely seems like the best option because everyone is already so messed up. People think it's okay to do the things that they do, and Adam can't change their minds on a scale that would stop the damage already done. He's ready to end humanity and start anew. However, his friends help him come to his senses. He wants to keep them safe and happy, and he can't do that if he ruins the world that they love, and eventually, whatever had been standing in the old quarry before, Adam Young was standing there now. A more knowledgeable Adam Young, but Adam Young nonetheless. Possibly more of Adam Young than there had ever been before. Furthermore, on that point, he himself would not be happy if he ruined the bit of the world that he loves. Both Aziraphale and Anathema comment on it because Adam's love for his home has been entrenched into the area by his powers. "Odd," muttered the angel. "I keep getting these flashes of..." He raised his hands to his temples. "What? What?" said Crowley. Aziraphale stared at him. "Love," he said. "Someone really loves this place." Anathema says, "It's hard to describe it. Something or someone loves this place, loves every inch of it so powerfully that it shields and protects it, a deep-down, huge, fierce love. How can anything bad start here?" Adam even says it eventually, when his friends press him. "But I'll have Tadfield," said Adam. They stared at him. And Lower Tadfield? And Norton Woods? They still stared. Adam's gaze dragged itself across their faces. "They're all I've ever wanted," he said. Adam loves the little bit of the world that has been carved out for him, and he has no desire to destroy it all. He bravely tells off death at the end, saying, "The world is full of all sorts of brilliant stuff, and I haven't found out all about it yet, so I don't want anyone messing it about or ending it before I've had a chance to find out about it. So you can all just go away." Even afterward, Adam doesn't use his powers to do much of anything beyond what kids do, have fun and inconsequentially bother adults. Adam just wants to have a good childhood and have fun with his friends. Aziraphale is a really fun character to analyze for a large multitude of reasons, one of which being his sense of self being centered on his role as an angel and what that means for him from a moral standpoint. "You see, evil always contains the seeds of its own destruction," said the angel. "It is ultimately negative and therefore encompasses its downfall even at its moments of apparent triumph. No matter how grandiose, how well planned, how apparently foolproof an evil plan, the inherent sinfulness will by definition rebound on its instigators. No matter how apparently successful it may seem upon the way, at the end it will wreck itself. It will founder upon the rocks of iniquity and sink headfirst to vanish without a trace into the seas of oblivion." Aziraphale, in his own mind, needs to constantly be on the good side of the story. Much of his conflict comes from his relationship with Crowley contradicting his relationships with heaven and God, but he cannot tackle those conflicts without first acknowledging his perspective of the world. His life revolves around being good at all times and supporting good at all times, no matter what. His internal struggle comes from grappling with a very black and white view on the world, which contrasts very nicely with Crowley's. He believes in capital G good and capital E evil and how they oppose each other, that there is a 100% all the time correct answer for every choice. He says that There's right and there's wrong. If you do wrong when you're told to do right, you deserve to be punished. And he's shown to explain that the whole point was that when a human was good or bad, it was because they wanted to be. Whereas people like Crowley and, of course, himself were set in their ways right from the start. His moral ego is so strong that he managed to convince himself that his opinions of right and wrong were the same as Heaven's, which ended up sideswiping him when he found out that they actually wanted to kill the Earth and everything on it just to settle some score that wouldn't stay settled. He was certain that when he called his higher-ups that they would agree to call off the war, only to be told, the forces of darkness must be beaten. You seem to be under a misapprehension. The point is not to avoid the war, it is to win it. We have been waiting a long time, Aziraphale. And this sticks with him. It was at that point that Aziraphale decided it was worth it to go against Heaven entirely to keep his world safe. He later on has to tell Adam that he's sure his people want Armageddon. It's very sad. But here's the thing. Aziraphale began as the guardian of the eastern gate of the Garden of Eden. He was gifted a flaming sword from God to keep the humans in his care safe, and used it for that purpose, though thinking outside the box. Eventually, Crawley said, "Didn't you have a flaming sword?" Aziraphale looked wretched. "If you must know," he said, a trifle testily, "I gave it away." Crawley stared up at him. "Well, I had to," said the angel. "They look so cold, poor things. And she's expecting already. And what with the vicious animals out there and the storm coming up, I thought, well, where's the harm? So I just said, look, if you come back here, there's going to be an almighty row. But you might be needing the sword, so here it is. Don't bother to thank me. Just do everyone a big favor and don't let the sun go down on you here." And not only did he give the sword to Adam and Eve to protect them, but he then proceeded to lie about it to God, revealed in the excerpt from the Bugger All This Bible in Aziraphale's collection, which states, "And the Lord spake unto the angel that guarded the eastern gate, saying, Where is the flaming sword that was given unto thee? And the angel said, I had it here only a moment ago. I must have put it down somewhere. Forget my own head next." And the Lord did not ask him again. Aziraphale was stationed on Earth to protect humanity, and slowly but surely, over the course of 6,000 years, he fell in love with the planet and its culture. It even affects his general behavior and decision-making, which is why his opinions in the end differ so much from the rest of Heaven. He loves the things humanity creates. He collects books to the point of having a veritable library. He indulges in earthly pleasures like food and music and storytelling, and he cares about how humans grow and learn. Crowley even resorts to these weaknesses when convincing Aziraphale to help him undermine the apocalypse. No salt, no eggs, no gravlax with dill sauce, no fascinating little restaurants where they know you, no daily telegraph crossword, no small antique shops, no bookshops either, no interesting old editions, no, Crowley scraped the bottom of Aziraphale's barrel of interests, Regency silver snuff boxes. And every 1,000 years this bird flies to sharpen its beak on the mountain. "Listen," said Crowley urgently. "The point is that when the bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right then," Aziraphale opened his mouth. Crowley just knew he was going to make some point about the relative hardness of birds' beaks in granite mountains, and plunged on quickly. "Then you still won't have finished watching The Sound of Music." Aziraphale loves the variety and creativity Earth and humanity provide, and he doesn't want to leave it behind. Part of the reason I love Aziraphale is that he's kind, scarily intelligent, a closet mischief maker, and incredibly stubborn in his decisions. He's kind in his decision to help humanity at the potential risk of himself. See the previous sword example. As for intelligence, Aziraphale is shown consistently to be well-spoken and able to outsmart others. For example, when he figures out where the Antichrist actually is. Aziraphale stirred and pinched his nose. He was nearly there. He'd got the shape of it. "This will be a Tadfield number, I think, or Lower Tadfield. Young, name of Young. Sorry, no initial. Oh, well, can you give me all of them? Thank you." At the third name, the pencil broke its point. "Ah," said Aziraphale, his mouth suddenly running on automatic while his mind exploded. "Sorry," he said. "Right number." Or when he figures out how to get around the Metatron and Beelzebub demanding war. "This great plan," Aziraphale said. "This would be the ineffable plan, would it?" "It doesn't matter," snapped the Metatron. "It's the same thing, surely." "Surely," thought Crowley. "They don't actually know." He started to grin like an idiot. In regards to him being a bit devious, Aziraphale takes great pleasure in outwitting and messing with people. Madame Tracy's mouth opened, and a voice said, "Not just a Southern Pansy, Sergeant Shadwell. The Southern Pansy." In Crowley's words, Aziraphale is just enough of a bastard to be worth liking. He may deliberate over his choices for a considerable amount of time, but once he deigns to make a choice, he is certain from that point onward that that was the right one. Once he decides to go against Heaven on Armageddon, he goes big rather than going home. He was prepared to potentially kill Adam to keep the world safe. He stood up to the voice of God, and he was wholeheartedly going to confront Satan himself when it came down to it. Aziraphale's character arc boils down to being willing to admit that the place he put faith into could be wrong, and accepting that he's allowed to continue protecting what makes him happy anyways. Crowley is quite easily my favorite character in the whole book for more reasons than I can explain in a reasonable amount of time. I could have made this whole essay about him, even. This demon is a therapist's best nightmare, and there's something so incredible about how he processes the world around him despite the hardships he's been put through. He doesn't have a very obvious, overarching arc to go throughout the story. He tends to hide the more emotional parts of himself, and is very good at compartmentalizing. He also has less reliance on authority for opinions, but I'll touch more on that later. Out the gate, he questions God, which, while not explicitly stated in the book, is largely accepted as the reason for why he fell, and the choices made by those around him. Whereas Aziraphale has unfailing belief that people are good deep down, as Crowley understands that humans, demons, and angels alike have disgusting and virtuous tendencies both. Humans, in his opinion, just have a larger range. Hell wasn't a major reservoir for evil, any more than heaven, in Crowley's opinion, was a fountain of goodness. They were just sides in a great cosmic chess game, where you found the real McCoy, the real grace, and the real heart-stopping evil was right inside the human mind. Crowley is incredible because he has curiosity and imagination like no other demon we're introduced to. Furthermore, Crowley doesn't just do evil like a demon technically should. He doesn't guide souls individually to hell. What he does is let them make the choice for themselves, a brilliant parallel to the fact that he's the Serpent of Eden, who gave humans the original choice. It's smart. Crowley is so smart, and in ways that complement how Aziraphale is smart. Crowley is, at his core, just so creative, in a way that, canonically, simply doesn't exist for other occult and ethereal beings. He even questions how he's meant to explain his logic of temptations to Hastur and Liger. How could he describe that then the people went back and took it all out on their secretaries or traffic wardens or whatever, and they took it out on other people? In all kinds of vindictive ways which, here was the good bit, they thought up themselves. He knows how to work the earth in his favor. Furthermore, when Hastur and Liger come to confront him, he is able to get himself out of it, defeating them both in clever ways. Liger, who he kills with a holy water bucket prank. Crowley leaned back in his executive chair. He forced himself to relax and failed appallingly. "And here, people," he called. "We want a word with you," said Liger, in a tone of voice intended to imply that word was synonymous with horrifyingly painful eternity. And the squat demon pushed open the office door. The bucket teetered, then fell neatly on Liger's head. And Hastur, who he tricks into following him into a phone line and traps in his antiphone. "But why don't we talk to the Dark Council? I'm sure that they can convince you." The number he had dialed started to ring. "So long, sucker," he said, and vanished. He stopped suddenly and watched Hastur shoot past him. Hastur turned in. Ring! Crowley shot out through the phone line, zapped through the plastic sheathing, and materialized, full size and out of breath, in his lounge. Click! Crowley, in the beginning, knows that he is, and Aziraphale and humanity are, capable of more than the boundaries he's been shoved into. When he says that he thinks giving Eve the apple was a good thing, Aziraphale responds with, "But you're a demon. I'm not sure if it's actually possible for you to do good." They don't change as fast as humans do, but if you convert 6,000 years of growth into a human lifespan, you can see that both the angel and demon have been developing and learning over the course of history. Even at infinitesimal levels, any new information will cause changes in the way a sentient being thinks. The only exception to this is God, and that's because God is omniscient and therefore cannot blind react to new stimuli. And even beyond their ability to change, Crowley subverts demonic tropes because he believes in making the right choice. Not necessarily the choice that is good, but the choice that is fair, outside of course, being a general nuisance to get his temptation credit. He doesn't explicitly hurt people, past self-defense, just generates annoyances for humanity and makes friends with an angel. He mostly just minds his own business. Crowley's imagination is the thing that gets him to Tadfield to stop Armageddon in the end. Despite the backfire of the M25 and having to drive his prize Bentley through Hellfire, which shows just how low his expectations were for the turnout of this fight, he was able to imagine that a ton of burning metal, rubber, and leather was a fully functioning automobile. Alongside being imaginative, Crowley is adaptable. He gave himself a human name and moves with the times where even Aziraphale, the only other immortal stationed on Earth, is unable to keep up. He lives in a modern apartment, he purchases up-to-date, state-of-the-art phones and television systems, and he tempts people in ways that keep up with the growing population. He enjoys people, as evidenced by the quote, "because he rather liked people. It was a major failing in a demon." And he enjoys how people change and make mistakes and inquire. Crowley is motivated by his curious and challenging nature, has been from the start, and it's particularly awe-inspiring to see him, a demon who at his core follows the principles of humanity and is the sole reason we have choices to begin with, adapt and grow with the world. He isn't some lowly rule follower. He changed to fit the scope of the life he learned to live on Earth. Being a demon, of course, was supposed to mean you had no free will, but you couldn't hang around humans for very long without learning a thing or two. Additionally, he truly cares for his life on Earth, to the point of being upset and unbalanced when the basket full of Antichrist is dropped in his arms. That's how it goes. You think you're on top of the world, and suddenly they spring Armageddon on you. And finally, we come to the aspect of solo character analysis that I am most excited to talk about, and it all starts with this passage. In fact, the only things in the flat Crowley devoted any personal attention to were the houseplants. They were huge and green and glorious, with shiny, healthy, lustrous leaves. This was because, once a week, Crowley went around the flat with a green plastic plant mister, spraying the leaves and talking to the plants. He had heard about talking to plants in the early 70s on Radio 4, and thought it an excellent idea, although talking is perhaps the wrong word for what Crowley did. What he did was put the fear of God into them. More precisely, the fear of Crowley, in addition to which, every couple of months, Crowley would pick out a plant that was growing too slowly, or succumbing to leaf wilt or browning, or just didn't look quite as good as the others, and he would carry it around to all the other plants. "Say goodbye to your friend," he'd say to them. He just couldn't cut it. Then he would leave the flat with the offending plant, and return an hour or so later with a large empty flower pot, which he would leave somewhere conspicuously around the flat. This section, this excerpt, is the most explicit example of Crowley's therapist's best nightmare status in the book. Crowley was an angel cast out from heaven, and is a demon that still ranks shockingly low in hell despite his status as the Serpent of Eden and being actively stationed on Earth for temptations. Crowley's houseplants are quite obviously a form of projection, and one of the only times we see the clearly traumatic experience of his fall addressed. This is Crowley putting himself in God's position in an attempt to cope with God throwing him out. This time, he is the one doing the casting. He is the one in power, especially in the way that he makes a parade out of the fallen plants. It's a subconscious coping mechanism for his feelings of humiliation for being cast out from the only life he knew. It makes the analogy all the more apparent that the objects under his judgment are plants, which can only be cast out for things blatantly inherent to them that are out of their control, like, say, leaf spots or slow growth, or curiosity and a heart for fairness. His plants are a compelling and telling parallel because he could, in theory, just force the plants to be better with his powers, like he does for his pants in the bookshop fire. And yet, he doesn't. He has the power to make the plants exactly as grown and green as he so desires, and makes the plants do the brunt of the changing anyways. This implies a number of things, but I will stick to the most important one for now. Crowley does not understand why God made him fall. It's a sticking point in Crowley's perspective, the question of why. Why did he have to fall? Why put the forbidden fruit in Eden if he didn't want people eating it? Why make it at all if he didn't want people eating it? Why make a world that's curious and smart and incredible just to ruin it all? And yet, despite everything, Crowley somehow holds on to optimism, because if there was one rock-hard certainty that had sustained him through the bad times, he thought briefly of the 14th century, that it was the utter surety that he would come out on top, that the universe would look after him. Even though he doesn't trust God, he trusts the universe to behave in ways God, in his eyes, had not intended. Humanity is constantly pulling out things that even Crowley can't imagine, and he trusts that implicit chaos to pull him through. He believes that, even when everything is against him, there is a solution out there that will make sure he ends up okay. Because he questions God, he's able to put his best foot forward. He uses logic to make the most informed decisions he can, rather than relying on word of mouth from the ethereal game of telephone. After all, knowing the difference between good and evil can't be that bad if it gives people the room to choose to be truly good. It doesn't make sense to create something that you nurture just to ruin it for some B-plot war from another part of the story, so obviously God wants him and Aziraphale to stop the apocalypse. Logic is how he grounds himself in his decisions. Crowley is aware of the inherent awfulness of all living things, just as he is aware of the innate goodness of some others. He knows what he views as right and fair, rather than complying to a black and white view of good and evil, and that's part of the reason I love him so much. Even though he's the only inhuman character, outside of maybe God, that adjusts to modern technological trends, he is still the character that has himself figured out. He retains, through falling, through witnessing human atrocities, through Armageddon itself, his inquiring, innovative, and imaginative nature. Despite everything, Crowley isn't afraid, for his own sake, to be unabashedly who he is, or at least present himself the way that he likes. And it's brilliant commentary on the relationships people have with themselves and their actions and their roles in life. People shouldn't just conform to doing what they are told. They need to ask questions and come to their own conclusions about their lives. You cannot be your own person if your opinions aren't formed by you, even though, yes, they're influenced by the world around you. The ways that characters interact with each other also illustrate wonderful development in themes. Whether platonic or romantic, hateful or loving, relationships show how people treat those around them and how the nature of being perceived affects perception of self and actions towards others. Shadwell, as discussed previously, is a lonely old man with a protective streak a mile long. His arc follows learning to honestly care for people and allow others to care for him. In the beginning, Newt is of the opinion that his superior and only fellow soldier was as well balanced as an upturned pyramid, but Newt had stuck with it the past few weeks because, well, horrified fascination had turned into horrified pity, and then horrified affection. Shadwell grows on Newt as they spend time together, and they form a mutual one-sided protection over each other. Shadwell thinks he has to protect Newt from the dangers of the witch-infested world, while Newt wants to protect Shadwell from loneliness. They genuinely enjoy each other's company by the end of it, and it's really sweet to see how proud Shadwell is of Newt. As for Madame Tracy, the two of them have presumably been living in the same building for a good few years by the point we meet them in the story. Tracy takes care of him by making him food on Sundays, and Shadwell unnecessarily protects his pride by pretending he doesn't enjoy it. His relationship with Madame Tracy is the key turning point in his character development. I'd like to bring attention back to this quote. Shadwell realized with dawning horror that he was comfortable. Horribly, terrifyingly comfortable. Because it just so perfectly encapsulates the point I'm trying to make. Letting himself be comfortable, letting himself feel safe, letting him be found by the witch this time around, it all accentuates how protection within relationships should go both ways, at least a little. One person does not have to be the strong one 24/7, 365. Anathema and Newt's relationship beautifully portrays how relationships can make people open up to an even fuller version of themselves. It's touching to read how the two of them almost immediately support each other. When Newt confesses to lying, "I'm not actually a computer engineer, at all. Quite the opposite. If you must know, every time I try and make anything electronic work, it stops." Anathema doesn't get upset. She just tells him how to use that to his advantage. "Tra-la," she said. "Repair it," she said. He reveals his issues with technology, the flaw he has that stops him from doing the one thing he is even vaguely passionate about, and she takes it in stride. And then in the aftermath, they quickly find themselves living domestically, with Newt trying to make her breakfast and getting her mail for her. He tries to stop her from seeing the new book of prophecy because he supports her and cares for her and wants her to be able to live a life that is her own, where she can enjoy hobbies that she picks and spend time with those she chooses to, hopefully him. And the best bit is that when he says something about it, she listens to him and is even implied to comply. This next relationship isn't between two characters, but the collectives of heaven and hell. Meant to be opposites, and yet Crowley and Aziraphale both make comments like the following. Just endless heaven, or, depending on who won, endless hell. Crowley didn't know which was worse. "Oh yes, the Reign of Terror. Was that one yours or one of ours? Wasn't it yours?" "You'll be amazed at the kind of things they can do to you down there," Crowley said. "I imagine they're very similar to the sort of things they can do to one up there," said Aziraphale. Which is very interesting to observe. Heaven and hell, basically the same thing, seems preposterous, except it really, really isn't. They're just two nations going to war, made from the same stuff, just with different cultures. There isn't anyone else. There's just us, right? Good and evil, one side or the other. Heaven and hell oppose each other only on the basis of needing someone they perceive as below them, so that they can feel like they're the ones using the correct method, and obviously their idea is wrong. This is evidenced by the Metatron's scolding of Aziraphale. "You seem to be under a misapprehension. The point is not to avoid the war, it is to win it." If the fight was out of some kind of self-defense because of hell starting it, heaven would want to avoid the war to stop unnecessary casualties. But heaven and hell both want this war to happen, desperately, I might even deign to say. Even more than that, they don't really want to win for good, evidenced by Adam saying, "But if you win, you can't really beat the other side, because you don't really want to. I mean, not for good. You'll just start all over again. You'll just keep on sending people like these two," he pointed to Crowley and Aziraphale, "to mess people around. It's hard enough being people as it is, without other people coming and messing you around." This is further accentuated by the parallel of the Cosmic War and the them versus the Johnsonites. Because, Pepper added, if we beat them, we'd have to be our own deadly enemies. It'd be me and Adam against Brian and Wensley. She sat back. Everyone needs a Greasy Johnson, she said. Heaven and hell want to fight for the sake of the entertainment of being better than someone else, not to actually prove anything about the other side. Now, Adam and the them and the four horsemen of the apocalypse have an increasing interesting parallel the more I look into them. To start, when the horsemen fully power up, so to speak, we get to see a little bit more of their roles as characters. It's all taken care of, said War. It's not just the nuclear, Pollution said. And then winter, said Famine. I like winter. There's something clean about winter. Only death hadn't changed. Some things don't. We get to see their motivations throughout the rest of the book as well, but here is where it is the most explicit. War wants people to be selfish and take what they want for themselves. Famine wants people to starve. Who needs to waste time on sustenance? Pollution holds a base desire to see the world in environmental ruin. Death merely seeks to clean the mess of the living. The horsemen were created from humanity rather than being born directly from God like every other supernatural being we interact with. Well, all except for Death, that is. Death is the only one of them that is an angel from him, and therefore creates a power dynamic. He is inherently the most powerful of them. Everything the rest stand for feeds into Death in his entirety. And this dynamic creates an intriguing comparison to the them. The them are a group of friends who encapsulate the idea of kids being kids. They're still learning the world. Well, I thought they worshipped the devil, said Brian, but without automatic condemnation. The them had an open mind on the whole subject of devil worship. The them had an open mind about everything. They care about each other because they have fun together, and they teach each other things. They have such an innocent friendship, but still have power differences in the way that the other three defer to Adam. Now, kids naturally fall into follower and leadership positions. It's just a behavioral pattern that comes from development. Adam can change reality, so you might think he is nudging people into opinions that aren't truly their own, but you would be wrong. We know this because the instant Adam switches into Antichrist mode, the rest of them immediately realize that something is wrong. Even Dog knows something is wrong. They wouldn't be able to pick up on this if they were already under the effects of his powers. There's an instant discomfort in the way he starts treating them. They're the ones that snap him out of it, and more importantly, they join him when he asks, not forces, them to help him put a stop to what he began. No, Adam came to his leadership spot naturally. Even if his powers helped him set up the situations, the them still have free will and the ability to think for themselves. Thus, this is where the parallel accentuates the glorious difference between dynamics. The them follow Adam because they choose to and because they have fun. The horsemen follow Death because they have to, even though they still have skills in their own rights. War, Famine, and Pollution fit into Death. Pepper, Wensleydale, and Brian complement and support Adam, and that's why the them beat the four horsemen in the end. They have the truer form of companionship. Little boys, War said, playing with your toys. Pepper stepped forward and raised a trembling arm. It wasn't much of a sword, but it was about the best you could do with 2 bits of wood and a piece of string. War drew her own blade, and brought it up so that it made a noise like a finger being dragged around a wine glass. Wensleydale raised his head and looked Famine in the sunken eye. He held something up that, with a bit of imagination, could be considered to be a pair of scales made of more string and twigs. Then he whirled it around his head. Famine struck out a protective arm. Pollution had already started to run, or at least to flow quickly, but Brian snatched the circlet of grass stalks from his own head and flung it. It shouldn't have handled like one, but a force took it out of his hands and it whirled like a discus. But I, Death said, am not like them. I am Azrael, created to be creation's shadow. You cannot destroy me. That would destroy the world. The heat of their stare faded. Adam scratched his nose. Oh, I don't know, he said. There might be a way. Obviously, each of them have their corresponding horsemen. Without them, Adam would not have been able to stop anything. His love for what they have together made him decide to stop Armageddon in the first place, and their support, even though they were scared, is what allowed him to follow through. This provides a beautiful commentary on scared respect versus happy support. It's okay to have a leader within a group, but that leader has to consider what the rest of the group wants, while the rest of the group needs to have a way to speak up for themselves. Last but not least, the relationship I'm most excited to talk about, Aziraphale and Crowley's bond. Whether the reader takes it as platonic or romantic, the relationship they have with each other is profound and incredible, although even other characters within the story assume Aziraphale and Crowley are romantically involved. Could we get on? Said Crowley. Good night, miss. Get in, Angel. Ah, well that explained it. Anathema had been perfectly safe after all. Frankly, I don't think it particularly matters either way. The sheer connection that comes from knowing someone for 60 centuries is probably beyond human comprehension of companionship anyways. They care deeply for each other, despite the fact that they are meant to be on opposite sides of everything. They know so much about each other that Crowley knows exactly what kind of things to say to make Aziraphale join in on his Antichrist scheme, because he knows that, despite his fear of heaven, Aziraphale truly wants to help protect the Earth. And it's not just Crowley knowing Aziraphale. The angel knew something was wrong just by Crowley's tone of voice when he was in trouble. Crowley's voice, getting louder as it neared the mouthpiece, said, "Really mean it. Hello? Crowley, it's me. The voice was horribly noncommittal. Even in his present state, Aziraphale sensed trouble. "Are you alone?" he said cautiously. "Nah, got an old friend here." Their friendship transcends innate loyalties. When we see their first meeting, we get to see how similar they already are without each other's influence. Even then, they both have a tendency to lean towards doing the right thing over the good or bad ones. Funny if we both got it wrong, eh? Funny if I did the good thing and you did the bad one, huh? When we look through Aziraphale's point of view, we get to see their relationship best. He ought to tell Crowley. No, he didn't. He wanted to tell Crowley. He ought to tell Heaven. But he'd known him for 1,000 years. They got along. They nearly understood each other. He sometimes suspected they had far more in common with one another than with their respective superiors. Though he obviously has his reservations, Crowley is far more willing to go against hell than Aziraphale is to go against heaven. As stated previously, Aziraphale wants to keep believing that heaven is in the right, whereas Crowley is more on his own side of things morally. The whole basis of their relationship revolves around Aziraphale pretending to heaven that he's thwarting Crowley's wiles so that they can safely interact without getting into trouble. Aziraphale wants to work with Crowley on everything, but he feels obligated to work with Heaven first before fixing things on their own. As soon as he realizes Heaven won't help him protect Earth, he calls Crowley to tell him. As we've established, Aziraphale loves Earth and the culture of humanity. However, he quite similarly loves being close to Crowley. He's willing to protect their friendship the way he's willing to protect Earth. He stops Crowley from getting shot accidentally, seemingly as a knee-jerk reaction. Then someone threw some jelly at Warlock. The boy squeaked and pulled the trigger of the gun. Aziraphale blinked. A thin stream of water squirted from the nozzle and soaked Crowley. They are said to spend a lot of time together, presumably drinking in the back room of Aziraphale's shop. "Not much more," said Aziraphale, who had never done other to get rid of demons than to hint at them very strongly that he, Aziraphale, had some work to be getting on with. And wasn't it getting late? And Crowley had always got the hint. And they banter and bounce off each other like an old married couple. "I was going to ask you the same thing. Watch out for that pedestrian! It's on the street. It knows the risk it's taking." "Suspicion will slide off of him like whatever it is water slides off of," he finished lamely. His forehead creased for a moment, then he slapped the steering wheel triumphantly. "Ducks!" he shouted. "What?" "That's what water slides off of." Aziraphale took a deep breath. "Just drive the car, please," he said wearily. "But it might be written differently somewhere else," said Crowley, "where you can't read it." "In bigger letters," said Aziraphale. "Underline," Crowley added. "Twice," suggested Aziraphale. While we already talked about Aziraphale's more explicit moments of love for Crowley, this next scene really shows off the extent of Crowley's love for Aziraphale. The bookshop fire is a scene that is beautifully heart-wrenching to read, and very well recreated in the TV show, if you're curious. Crowley, at this point, just survived an attempt on his life and perma-killed another demon using holy water, which, had he messed up, could have killed him instead. From his perspective, Aziraphale called him mid-fight to tell him something important, and when he went to find out what it was, Aziraphale's most precious place was burning to the ground. In an unsurprising turn of events, Crowley pushed open the door and stepped into an inferno. And this is where the scene becomes truly heartbreaking. He scanned the shop urgently, desperately, looking for the angel, looking for help. This line directly implies that Crowley views Aziraphale as someone who he trusts to help him. Crowley, a demon in a book that explicitly states that demons trusting even each other would be a very funny thing, trusts Aziraphale, an angel, the enemy, to be someone to help him. He even almost swears to heaven and hell, which he consistently tries to remove himself from. Hello? Aziraphale, for somebody's sake, Aziraphale! Then the scene exposes more of Crowley's character. The shop window was smashed from the outside. Crowley turned, startled, and an unexpected jet of water struck him full in the chest, knocking him to the ground. His shades flew to a far corner of the room and became a puddle of burning plastic. Yellow eyes with slitted vertical pupils were revealed. Wet and steaming, face ash-blackened, as far from cool as it was possible for him to be, on all fours in the blazing bookshop, Crowley cursed Aziraphale and the ineffable plan, and above and below. This is the first and only time we get to see Crowley's eyes in the book. Even when we see Crowley without sunglasses in Eden, Pratchett and Gaiman don't describe him much at all. From the minute we meet him in human form, Crowley is wearing sunglasses. Eyes are commonly believed to be the windows to the soul, and he constantly has a physical barrier blocking them. Crowley uses walls to protect him, not letting his emotions show through to avoid being invalidated. I can't imagine hell is a very supportive place, and from the way he and Aziraphale compare superiors, heaven behaves much the same. They are the only support each other has. Losing Aziraphale is the worst thing that could have happened to him. He's devastated. He's in deep with hell, his angel is gone. What barrier does he need to keep up at this point? The instant he believes Aziraphale is dead, Crowley starts behaving as if he has nothing to lose. He goes off to Tadfield to fight the apocalypse, thinking things like, what the hell, if you had to go, why not go with style? Crowley, confirmed optimist, even considers giving up and going to get wasted at a pub until the world blows up. Aziraphale is so happy when they're reunited, too. He immediately expects to rely on Crowley once the demon shows up, and supports him through the loss of his Bentley. Furthermore, we get another cool piece of symbolism from the very end. They went to the Ritz again, where a table was mysteriously vacant, and perhaps the recent exertions had had some fallout in the nature of reality because, while they were eating, for the first time ever, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. Nightingales have very interesting symbolism within literature, known for representing virtue, goodness, and the righteousness of nature. Having a nightingale sing at the end of the last interaction we see between the two of them, despite it explicitly being against all odds, is a way of showing how God approves of their actions. Them stopping the apocalypse was good. It was the right thing to do in the eyes of God, even if they don't get to hear the birds singing. Authority is important. This is something that must be properly established. Yes, authority is important because without it the world would fall apart entirely. For groups of people, an authority figure has to be appointed to keep things organized. How in the ever? It's even more imperative for individuals to have critical thinking skills and be able to think for themselves. Blindly following someone just because they hold power over you will get you into trouble. Adam, as soon as he started doing what his father, read Satan, wanted, started losing everything he loved, because he, in Crowley's words, was raised to be human incarnate. He made a life for himself that he desperately wanted to keep, and therefore ended up attached to what he was meant to destroy. He loves Tadfield and the them and his human parents. Following orders would take all of that from him, and it almost does. The them only grow to be scared of him when he acts like the Antichrist instead of the Adam that they know. It's only when they threaten to leave him that he comes back to himself to fix everything. His lesson is in learning to ignore the expectations placed upon him. Heaven and hell eagerly await him, bringing the earth to its knees, but that's not what he wants. The world is only saved when he starts standing up for what he cares for rather than what has been written. He protects what he loves by refusing to participate in a war he doesn't believe in. After all, Adam seldom did what his father wanted. Throughout the entirety of the book, Crowley and Aziraphale are doing their best to get around what their respective bosses want, even if one is more willing to admit it than the other. Crowley shows a blatant disdain for heaven and hell in equal measure. He hates heaven because it cast him out without a care, and he hates hell because, well, it's hell. Terrifyingly, he and Aziraphale often compare the two, saying that being a part of one is just as bad as the other. The two sides treat their respective Earth agents very poorly. The Metatron patronizes Aziraphale as if he's some fool, despite the fact that Aziraphale is one of the smartest characters introduced to us in the book. The Metatron refuses to even let Aziraphale speak once he starts questioning the war, cutting him off over and over again until he finally gives in. Well, you can simply make sure that we will win, Aziraphale. Yes, but the forces of darkness must be beaten. You seem to be under a misapprehension. The point is not to avoid the war, it is to win it. We've been waiting a long time, Aziraphale. And Crowley was the Serpent of Eden, the original tempter, given credit for atrocities like the Spanish Inquisition, and yet despite being probably the most productive demon on Earth, he has no title and doesn't even bother trying with hell. From the moment he's given the Antichrist in a basket, he's extremely uncomfortable. He doesn't trust Hastur or Liger in the slightest, and he really doesn't want to be the one to handle this baby. The instant he realizes the Antichrist was lost, he knows he's doomed. Even though it was a human error, he's the one being held accountable. As seen in how they try to kill him, and what Beelzebub says to him through the Bentley after. Mortals can hope for death, or for redemption. You can hope for nothing. All you can hope for is the mercy of hell. Aziraphale and Crowley both love being on Earth far more than they like being in heaven or hell. They rarely even get checked on, to the point they feel safe to have the arrangement. The authorities didn't seem to care too much who did anything, so long as it got done. However, despite the fact that they share sentiments of fear and distaste for their higher-ups, Aziraphale is far more hesitant to leave heaven behind. This is due to the fact that Aziraphale, at his core, believes that heaven's standards are the same as God's, and therefore cannot be gone against lest he fall from grace. He feels an obligation to heaven that conflicts with his desire to be kind to people, because destroying the earth would kill everything he has grown to appreciate. Aziraphale has tried to support God's ineffable plan, which, in his mind, must be the same plan heaven is following, so, by the transitive property, they all must want the same thing. And yet, they don't want the same thing. Aziraphale wants to show love and kindness to everything God created. Heaven wants to have an end-all war that they believe God endorses. Ergo, Aziraphale must work through the internal conflict of one versus the other versus the love he has for Earth and Crowley. And eventually, finally, he starts to get it when he connects the dots of heaven's true motives. And as for that stuff about heaven inevitably winning, well, to be honest, if it were that cut and dried, there wouldn't be a celestial war in the first place, would there? It's propaganda, pure and simple. We've got no more than a 50% chance of coming out on top. You might as well send money to a Satanist hotline to cover your bets. Although, to be frank, when the fire falls and the seas of blood rise, you lot are all going to be civilian casualties either way. Between our war and your war, they're going to kill everyone and let God sort it out, right? Aziraphale and Crowley had to form their own side to the war because their authorities were trying to force them into a situation they could not support. And they're so happy once they get their freedom. Eating food together, and living with humanity, and enjoying culture, and just spending time with each other like they've wanted. Crowley provides a good example for how to properly handle authority. He questions every decision he doesn't understand. I can't see what's so bad about knowing the difference between good and evil anyway. Why make people inquisitive and then put some fruit where they can see it with a big neon finger flashing on and off saying, "This is it"? You start thinking, it can't be a great cosmic game of chess. It has to be just very complicated solitaire. It's so important because he was cast out for this. He pushed to understand the world around him and kept pushing even when higher-ups didn't like his probing. This removed him from the toxic environment that his best friend is currently stuck in, and now he's the only character in position to cast judgment on heaven, hell, and earth, and why it's so telling that he chooses to live in freedom on a constantly changing earth rather than deal with beings of his own kind. As stated in his personal character analysis, Crowley puts himself in the hands of the universe and rejects all other occult and ethereal authorities. Aziraphale, on the other hand, toes the line a lot more gently, up until he gets pushed past the breaking point, that is. The biggest thing he does is blatantly lie to God, which he did to protect God's creation, which he thought deep down God wanted. He believes that living things should be protected, and commits to keeping creatures safe using the reasoning that it must be part of the inevitable plan, even though he can't know for sure. He convinces himself that what he thinks is good, God also thinks is good, so that he can maintain the moral high ground his sense of self is centered around, and he uses that belief to force authority to support his actions. The characters' various arcs represent a wide range of people and issues, and yet still converge into the same message. Being earnest with yourself and compassionate with those around you will build you into a person that you like. You must stand your ground firmly in the face of adversity and take no nonsense. Humanity as a whole has a wide moral range, from the worst scum of the earth to the sweetest darlings on the planet. It's important to understand that people are constantly evolving and changing. Every new piece of information makes a shift in mentality, no matter how small. So take in as much knowledge as possible to grow to be better than you were before. Good Omens easily ranks in my top 3 favorite books of all time. Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman did a fantastic job creating a story with social commentary and comedic elements that mesh together well without losing their respective impacts. It teaches that treating people fairly is key for fulfilling interactions with others, but it's also important to keep in mind what you want from your life, both long-term and day-to-day. Introspection and awareness of the world around you are necessities for understanding your place in the world, and this book displays that perfectly.